have ever had this experience. You're out in public and you cross paths with a complete stranger who starts talking to you and knows you by name. Who has this happened to? Somebody knows you and you have no idea who they are. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, some people it comes more easier than others. But so when the situation happens, right, you frantically start scanning your brain for who this person could be and how this person knows you. Maybe they've changed their look since the last time you saw them, and the whole time you act, though, like you know who they are, right? You try to act like you know who they are because you don't want to offend them, and it would be embarrassing to also admit that you don't know who they are. And so sometimes it hits you as you continue talking, Other times you might just pray that the conversation will end soon. Or if you are like Cleopas in our story today and his unnamed companion that we do not know, you treat them like a stranger and you just continue on as normal. I wonder, as you heard this story being read, if you found some things a bit strange. Let's look at the big picture so that we're all on the same page. This story is told in the Gospel of Luke, and it's told as the same day as Jesus' resurrection. So just before this in Luke, the women have seen the empty tomb. Peter, one of the disciples, also went and saw that the tomb was empty, but no one had seen Jesus yet, according to Luke. And so these two men seem to be people that were followers of Jesus, close to him. They're walking from Jerusalem, where Jesus has been killed, to Emmaus, which is a 7-mile journey on foot, not very long for people in that day. They're very devastated and confused about the news that they heard, and so when Jesus comes up and walks alongside them, they don't recognize him. And Luke said that their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And we might be wondering, how did they not know that it was Jesus, right? But here's what I wonder. I wonder if they don't recognize Jesus because they already assume that they know the whole story. Their whole conversation may be difficult for us to read because most of us don't have conversations like this with strangers. We typically don't interrupt another conversation that two people are having that we don't know, right? Asking them what they're talking about. But Jesus inserts himself right into it, like it's not a big deal. And Cleopas is surprised, but not because Jesus is being socially awkward. He's surprised because he was surprised that Jesus wouldn't already know what was going on. You see, all that was happening in that time, on that day, was spreading, right? It was very political. Today, it would be all over the news and social media. Crucifixion in the Roman Empire was extremely politicized. And so Jesus has just been crucified, and now the tomb has somehow been opened. Jesus' body is nowhere to be found. That's the story that they know. And so Cleopas says, "Are you a stranger in Jerusalem who does not know what has happened?" And it's interesting, if we look at the original Greek word for stranger in this instance, because it can be also used for someone who lives in a country without citizenship, so an immigrant or a foreigner. And so he's literally telling Jesus that he doesn't belong, that he's an outsider because he's clueless about what has just happened. So talk about a situation that is charged with so many emotions, a situation where so many large assumptions are being made. First, he assumes that Jesus is a foreigner, and then we see that he makes what I think is an even bigger assumption. Cleopas says, "We had hoped Jesus would be the one to redeem Israel." You see, the dreams of Israel's redemption were completely gone when Jesus was killed. In this culture, when someone dies, that's it. There was nothing more. So when Cleopas and so many others of Jewish faith, for them, Jesus failed to deliver the hopes of salvation. He says, "We had hoped." He uses past tense, and that's important because their assumption is that Jesus had not redeemed. It's over, right? They assumed that the resurrection had not happened. Jesus' body is just missing. And so he tells Jesus about the women coming to the tomb, shocking them, saying that the tomb is empty, and how others verified the story, but they did not see him. In other words, Cleopas could also be saying, they say that he's alive because the tomb is empty, but they have to be lying because they didn't see Jesus. It has to be a fabrication, right? Like last week when Pastor Doug was talking about Thomas needing proof, it's the same thing. They don't have proof to know that Jesus is alive. Now, we have an advantage in knowing the end of the story when we tell these resurrection stories. We already know the end, and so perhaps we can be sympathetic to these two traveling men, knowing that they don't know the end of the story. And so they're obviously grieving. We don't know exactly how, but we know that they followed Jesus in some capacity. They saw him as their Savior. They're disappointed. They're trying to sort everything out themselves. They've been through a lot in just 3 days. And let's face it, we've had those same things on our minds as well. I'm sure we have our own phrase for we had hoped that Jesus would blank. You see, they had small hopes, though, for what Jesus could actually do. Save us, benefit us, deliver us. But Jesus reminds them and all of us in this story that God's plan is much bigger. God's plan was for the entire world. Yale Divinity School professor Michelle Beth Dinkler writes about how this narrative is dripping with irony. She says that Cleopas cannot see that he is describing his dashed hopes to the one in whom those hopes are fulfilled. This often happens in Jesus' parables. The one who assumes he understands is shown to be a fool. So grace is always in abundance, and Jesus shows them that grace by asking them questions, even though he already knows the answers. But I think this particular resurrection story gives us an opportunity to ponder about how what we say and how we say it matters. There are assumptions that are all around us today. We hear them when we turn on the news. We might hear them in waiting room conversations or checkout lines. Some of the assumptions that we hear are true, but most of the time they aren't true. They're just strong opinions. And many of these assumptions can breed division, and they seek to demonize or destroy an opposing assumption or a whole group of people. And it's all really exhausting. I know we're all exhausted. But I wonder, what assumptions do you personally make? Maybe you have personal assumptions about certain groups of people or certain neighborhoods or certain lifestyles or certain events that have happened in our world. Some of those assumptions may be deeply rooted from your childhood and how you were raised. But how many of those assumptions were made because of what you heard on television or on the radio, or what came past as you scrolled your newsfeed that really is tailored exactly to you, telling you exactly what you want to hear? And how many of our assumptions really are true? And do we ever really take the time to find out if they're true? Do we click that share button because we know that it will spread like wildfire and then support our own agendas? I had a coworker at my last church who once shared a meme with me that comes up in my mind every now and then. And the meme said, "It's not gossip, it's sharing prayer requests." How often do we share things in the name of prayer requests, saying it can't be gossip? I'm lifting up a prayer request for you. It sounds hilarious, but friends, I think sometimes we need to check ourselves. What we say and how we say it matters. Because we can be awesome witnesses for Christ, or in our own assumptions, we can be like those two travelers who completely miss the risen Christ even when he's walking right beside them. And along with that, they miss the hope and the promise that the suffering and confusion that they're going through right then is not the end of the story. They miss the new life that is available right in front of them. So Jesus isn't afraid to call that out. He does it all the time, and he does it here too. He tells them that they're foolish. He repeats to them the scriptures, helping them understand that God's plan was more than what they thought and how they were told about all of this. And the astounding thing is that even after all of that, they still don't recognize that it's Jesus. They still think that he's just some random stranger trying to tell them things that they believe aren't true. But then another thing happened that wouldn't happen today. They get to Emmaus after their journey, and they urge Jesus to stay with them. Now, we would probably not invite complete strangers, right, to stay in our homes with us. But in that culture, that's very common, especially in the first century. Even though Jesus was a stranger, so he does stay with them. And this is our favorite part, right? The table is set. Jesus turns the social roles all around. He takes the bread, he blesses it, he breaks it, and he gives it to them. And suddenly, they get it. Jesus does the most Jesus thing of all. And they realize that it's him, that he was there all along. Their assumptions were wrong. Jesus really is indeed risen and chose of all people to appear to them. Not one of the 12, right? But to them. You may have heard me talk before about how our 4 gospel accounts are all different and unique in their own way. And Luke likes to focus on 2 different themes that we see popping up. One is travel. Throughout the gospel, the disciples are traveling towards Jerusalem. And the other theme is food. And so we see both of those in this story as we get towards the end of Luke. We see travel happening, and we also see a meal being shared with Jesus around that. It's as if things are kind of coming full circle at the end. But these 2 men don't recognize Jesus by his walk or his voice or his teaching. It's in the breaking of the bread. It's in the taking and the breaking and the sharing of the bread. You see, in that moment, Jesus is being his full, authentic self. Really, once they allowed Jesus to be himself, they finally knew that it was him. Because at that table, there wasn't an agenda, there wasn't an argument anymore about the events that had just happened. They knew that it was him. Jesus was just there. They were sharing a meal together. They recognized him when they weren't trying to impose their own agenda on him, when they weren't making assumptions about who he was. I wonder how often we might unintentionally force Jesus to conform to our own agenda. How often do we ask Jesus to be what we want Jesus to be instead of letting Jesus be who he really is? You see, Jesus called these men foolish because during the entire walk, they were literally reducing the divine agenda. They weren't open to the ways that everything had changed, that everything had been made new, that God's plan was a lot bigger than what they thought it could be, than what they could ever imagine. And so I wonder, in our own discussions with one another, do the things that we discuss amongst ourselves lead us toward Jesus? Or do they only lead us to more division and fear? The simple act of breaking bread transforms their mind and helps them to see that it was Jesus who was with them that whole time. There was no turning back. After this, they go and they tell the others. They become witnesses. My friends, I think it's hard today to see through all of the noise and all of the assumptions, but there really is new life all around us. And so we can let the noise and the narrative of the day bring us down, keep us from seeing that new life, or we can grab hold of what Jesus is offering and be bold in our witness to proclaim the good news and to love as Jesus loved. It's as simple as that. And that happens when we step out of our comfort zones, which isn't always so simple, right? It happens when we stand up for the things that Jesus would stand up for. It happens when we break free from our traditions or the ways that we think that things need to be done to try something new. And I love the ways that you all are embracing new things here. So how might God be calling you to let go of your assumptions and embrace something new? It also happens right here at this table in front of us. In the breaking of the bread, in remembering the story, it really does have the power to remind us of the ways that we are not alone and the ways that Jesus is still offering us new life. I invite you to pray with me.